Okay, as I said, I was going to talk a little bit about how I've been applying my interest in peers and social dynamics and spatial or place effects, and uniquely how mHealth is a platform where I think we could do some creative experimenting with these types of, or any types of approaches that you come across when we're thinking of outcomes. And what I'm going to do is just give an overview of some of the theoretical pieces that I think have informed me, and then do a high overview of some of our trials that we've completed, and end up with some, hopefully some questions and conversations. So I just wanted to put out an old quote from 1934 about the self arising in a social process that really guides the idea that we are constituted in our lives within relation to others, and that's a primary sort of foundation as guiding my work. And the other one, and maybe is less familiar to the crowd, is a geographer named Robert Sack, who wrote an interesting book, Homo Geographicus, and that we're these geographical beings and adapting and transforming the earth and creating meaningful places, and those places have effects on our lives, on our health, on our psychological and social interactions. So this is a little background of some of the ideas that are informing me. And so if I were to conceptualize a hypothesis that would bring both of those ideas, the social and spatial, together, I would say it like this, that in my idea, the substance misuse is a developmentally contingent social practice, so it happens within timing and development, and it happens within a social context, but it's constituted within a place, it's grounded, so it's our routine environmental places that we frequent have effects on, in particular, to some of these health behaviors that we've followed with adolescents in urban settings, and now we're moving into young adults and in more less urban settings, let's say. So here's a picture of that, and simply, this is familiar to most of you, but just matters who you are, what you bring to the occasion, right? Matters where you're at and who you're with. And so this sort of interaction between those, and that piece in the middle, this sort of is something that we'll talk about, is this influence of and effects that the peers have, both positively and enhancing risk, that those interact with place, and as well as the individual susceptibility or protective nature of the person in consideration. So here's a simple social spatial idea that youth interact with peers, and that these peers interact in places that have meaning to them, so they're grounded in meaningful places, and that this interaction between peers and place can shape health behavior in a unique fashion, which we'll demonstrate in a little bit. So supporting theories, I just wanted to show you some of the underpinnings of what I've been working with, this idea that youth experience themselves indirectly through their significant peers. The symbolic interaction theory is an old one, and everyone knows Bandura's theory, essentially, who's in this room probably, but the social theory of thought and modeling, and the sort of strong theories that have come out of the Chicago School of Sociology and neighborhood effects and social disorganization, and how those loosen our neighborhood disorder, for example, crime and unemployment, increase levels of poverty, loosen our connection to place, and increase risk for behavioral outcomes. But something maybe you're not as familiar with is place attachment theory. So taking we know attachment theory from Bowlby, but taking that model and thinking about it to a place and how an individual does the same kind of thing, that sort of approach, avoidance, and gaining competence and confidence in how they're developing and using a place as a touchstone for self-regulation. And my colleague, Kalevi Korpela, has developed this place attachment theory, and if you're interested in any of these, I can pull those up. So how does this place, just quickly, how does the idea of place shape behavior? And what we've been looking at, and in the literature in the last 20 years, folks have identified things like identity formation can occur as a psychosocial mechanism specifically connected to place, that problem solving can occur there, emotional regulation, that I go to a place to regulate, I go to a place to maybe figure things out. I go to a place because that's where I belong and I'm with others, and this is our place, our space. It's also has to do with our developing independence and autonomy as a critical feature for adolescent development. And then there's been research on social competency, that place can enhance that and have these would all be considered positive psychosocial mechanisms moving towards what we would consider normative, healthy development. So I just want you to know there's a pretty strong literature in this idea of place attachment and the effects of place on development and ultimately on behavioral health. So how do we do this? Study people in place. One of the concepts that the world of geography and public health have come up with is what's called activity space, and that would be all the places that we frequent during our routine activities. So your office, your YMCA, your park, your friend's basement, wherever you go on a regular basis. So think of it as an index of all the places. So we would ask people about those things before we started tracking them, but we still do both of those ways of collecting this kind of data. But it's not just longitude and latitude. These things are infused with meaning, and they have the ability to make psychological, social, and health-related consequences in our lives. So that's the argument for including a place-based perspective to peers to substance abuse. That this has been ignored in a lot of the psychology and in social sciences that are looking at behavioral health by and large. Here's a idea that or a graphic that explains this idea of the place-based peer network. And this is an idea, I developed this counseling program called Peer Network Counseling. And one of the constructs of that counseling program is this idea of peer network health. So it's the think of it as an index of your close friends and their summative risk and protective behaviors, and put those all together, and it's a concept of what your peer network health is. So you have subject A has three close friends, and they all have their own unique risk and protective qualities, but then we locate this into a place, let's say in Philadelphia, in the Galleria Mall. But at the Galleria Mall, my friend number 1 and 3 typically come. Number 2 doesn't come with me to the mall, for example. And beyond who's there, we try to understand some of the features and the risk and protective qualities of that activity space. So things like the neighborhood disorder, the access to tobacco and alcohol, the outlets for those products, for example, the density of those, drug sales and crime. And we found that not only all those things, but the day of the week, the way that you transport yourself and how long you stay there can be predictive of urban adolescent substance use. So you could go to a high-risk place but stay less than 2 hours and it's on a weeknight, and your probability of using drugs is way less than if you did the reverse of those. So all those things together, ideally, is the place-based peer network health. So this is the program, Peer Network Counseling, and then we've adapted it and turned it into a text-driven intervention, what we call PNC text. Like I said, it was in-person. It was a motivational interviewing sort of grounded approach, but it has a unique feature that it focuses on peer relations as the sort of active ingredient or the mechanism for change. It activates the participants' reflections on who they associate with, just like motivational interview does on reflecting on your use. So tell us about your friends, what's the positive and negative or protective and risky behaviors. But we also do that, where do you typically hang out with these three friends, so that this place concept starts to infuse the intervention. And then the idea is that they can make subtle, small relational adjustments. So we make very explicit, everyone that's worked with adolescents knows the worst thing you could do is say your friends are bad, you need to change them. So we don't go at it that way. We say we know you like your friends, you don't have to throw out your friends. This is just an idea to reflect on your friendships in a level and in a detail that they haven't done before. It's all sort of second nature to us, but most people haven't sort of thought through this in a detailed way. So we have them think about that, and then they can make subtle adjustments. I don't have to get rid of my friend Doug. I just have to spend more time with Doug in the bookstore and the library than the local bar. And so I still see Doug, but I've made a little adjustment in terms of where we're associating. And I'll get to this later, but we think that one of the main activating principles of change is that they're starting to reduce these problems in their relationships, reducing conflict, and then that is leading to less substance use when they start to make their relational world a little more positive. So just like a lot of interventions, we get data at baseline, but we also get it ongoing during the intervention, and we can make changes, not quite as a Jedi, but we're trying, and we're adapting as our interventions are 4 weeks, and we have them engaged in an interactive texting conversation every other day. So there's 16 days of treatment, you could say. We use the Text It program, a web-based program. You can talk to anybody about that to populate and send out the messages. We also use this other program called Twilio that is the device that sends all the messages to the various carriers, to AT&T and to Sprint, and they handle all that. So you have to have both of those. Good news is they're pretty stable platforms and they're inexpensive. So it's 4 weeks long. They get about 7 texts every other day for 16 days for a total of 112 of the intervention texts. So this is just a quick what it would look like. These before we start the main 7 questions, and it varies 5 to 7. We do this collection of immediate, real time, and as they're feeling right now, their level of stress. We have used the word craving, Brian, and it'd be interesting to see a change of language. What would that do? But we're thinking about cannabis use in young adults. It doesn't seem to be that disturbing to them. Yes, I do crave my weed after a number of hours, or those sorts of things. And then we ask them, have they used in the last 48 hours? Giving them feedback, giving them a sense that we heard them through the surveys, and this is what you told us, that you like to smoke, and that would be a little acronym for using cannabis. You like to relax with it, but you're concerned about how it's maybe affecting your memories, and they can respond yes or no. If they say no, then we say, that's what we have on the survey, and then we have them give us feedback that's correct, and we move on from there. we try to connect it to some of the things that Brian was talking about, goals, and we talk in their goals and their ideas about their own health, their academic goals, if it's a older population. So we're giving them feedback about that. We're giving them ideas about spending and making these spatial adjustments, we would call it, as well as their social adaptions with their peer network. So thinking of hanging out with their friends, like I gave the example at say a place that you couldn't, smoke in a bookstore or a coffee shop. Okay, so that's what it would look like. Skip through this. This is just what I just showed you. So this is what, they would do the survey. It would look something like this, assessing their feelings of safety. And then on the phone, it would look like this. So you told us you feel very safe in your neighborhood, right? And like I said, if that says no, we'd make an adjustment. And then we'd give them some direct feedback, regardless of their response. But it would be tailored or be conditioned on that. We also vary the sort of format, so it's not just text. It's we can do. We think this will improve engagement and communication, and we can save a lot of time by sending one thing, and they can choose, say, an activity. This is coming from a study that's ongoing right now that's targeting a stress reduction, opioid risk reduction project. So they're going to pick a health strategy from this list. Once they pick that, they picked being active. So we send them a little reminder. It's like, this is what you picked. That's great. Stay active. So we send them some funny little pictures like that. Then throughout the program, unless they change, if that's not working for them, we have them try something else. But then we can just send them this little emoji of the running person on the days off, or just remember, so we don't have to say the whole thing like, oh yeah, I'm supposed to be active, or whatever I'm doing. We also have them have the opportunity to give us, or for them to get more information about, say, staying active if they want. And there's booster messages as needed, little happy, corny kinds of messages that they seem to actually like very much, and they can do that anytime. So we've conducted as quickly a bunch of trials, starting really small, and then with alcohol and tobacco, and then we've been moving on into cannabis. And this is the trial that we have ongoing right now, and we're excited about that because we're adding the parents for the first time. So the parents are getting a simultaneous text-delivered messages with the teen, and that should be interesting. And we have a multi-site large cannabis intervention proposed, and we're hoping to hear good news from the NIH gods shortly. So we're lighting incense and doing everything we can. Here's just quickly some of the effects that we've had. Alcohol, our initial sort of proof of concept, gave us some encouragement. We did some good reduction on adolescent tobacco use. Cannabis use, we seem to make some movements on young adults and adolescents who are the heavier users. These young adults all have cannabis use disorders, so they're at the higher end in terms of their severity. So I won't just give you a quick picture of that. I wanted to show you this. This is during the intervention. So these are the 16 days, and this is a graph that's showing two groups. The group that gets support from their friend, yes, or the group that says, I rarely get that or I never get that. And the difference and the large effect that has on the past 48-hour cannabis use was pretty striking to us. So along with this idea that they actually made, this wasn't our suggestion, mind you, we want them just to make subtle changes, but we asked them, since the last time we surveyed you, are you still hanging out with Susan, Doug, and Matt? And they're like, Matt is gone, and now there's Jack. So those people who made changes after 3 months did a lot better in terms of reducing their cannabis use in the past 30 days. And we're reducing relationship problems. I just wanted to show you this one this one quote down here, which kind of implicates that they are actually trying to make some of these spatial adjustments. They're actually going to a different location with their friends and working out and doing some other activities. So that was encouraging. This is what we think is happening. We think, like I said, the PNC is doing the reflecting on their network. They make these changes. It reduces conflicts. And then we found that this is actually reducing indirectly heavy cannabis use through the reduction of cannabis or relationship problems related to cannabis. So those would be fights with friends and family, people telling them they're concerned about their smoking, or just conflicts that arise, either being high or just being somehow connected to their work. Their work, their cannabis use. Okay. I'm out of time, but I just want to say the exciting part as a intervention researcher is that we've got the idea that we can have a highly controlled little environment, and you can make adjustments. You can have lots of precisions of the components because it's highly controlled, but we're not at a place where we know exactly what transfers, in a digital world, how to make these adaptions. I did it because it was my intervention, so I knew what to do, but I don't know how to do it exactly on something else. And all the other kinds of competing interests and changes and income levels. So 4 recommendations. I think we've got to go into more detail about how we do this, talk about our theory, how we're adapting it. You would be amazed, we did a meta-analysis, and they don't tell you how many texts they're giving and frequency and just basic stuff, and give a little more technical detail, and then start trying to figure out, like Brian is doing as well, as what's making these changes happen. So thanks to all colleagues and to NIDA and to all the great project staff, and that's all I got right now. Thanks.